Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being a patient audience. On behalf of the LL Narayan family, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all on this fantastic occasion to celebrate the centenary of a doyen of industry, Mr. LL Narayan. Occasions such as this are rare and therefore need to be celebrated with all the appropriate pomp and ceremony possible. As is to be expected, many well-wishers of Sri LL Narayan and the family requested speaking slots and an opportunity to garland Mr. LL Narayan's photograph. Unfortunately, due to paucity of time, we are unable to accommodate these requests. We are, however, grateful to these well-wishers and extend the gratitude of the family for their kind thoughts. From having joined Rane Private Limited, a trading company engaged in automobiles and parts in the 1930s, to having the mantle of running the Rane business fall upon him on the passing of his father-in-law, to then making the strategic shift from trading and distribution into manufacturing by establishing Engine Valves Limited. Mr. LL Narayan charted a course that has culminated in the creation of the conglomerate, that is, the Rane Group. He was chairman of the Rane Group till 1989 when his eldest son, Mr. Lakshman, took over, but continued, however, to take active interest in the group. He served on various industry and trade associations, including the South Indian Chamber of Commerce, the Association of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, the All India Automobile and Ancillary Industries Association, and Air India Advisory Committee. It is with great pride and joy that we're all gathered here today to celebrate his birth centenary. Having said that, it is now time to plunge straight into the agenda for the day. I would first like to begin by inviting up on stage Mr. L. Lakshman and Mr. L. Ganesh, and with them our guests of honor, Mr. N. Shankar, Chairman, Sanmar Group, Mr. Abhay Firodia, Chairman, Force Motors, and Padma Shri Michelle Danino. Welcome, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in that part of the world where everything has an auspicious beginning. Having said that, we will now begin today's proceedings by invoking the blessings of the gods above. I now request Ms. Pavitra and Ms. Vanita to please come up on stage and take us through the invocation.
Narayana, 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 Nilla Namada Smaraneya, Saramritavu Yella Nalige Varali. Narayana Nilla Namada Smaraneya, Saramritavu Yella Nalige Varali. Narayana. Kashtadallirali, Utkrishthadallirali, Kashtadallirali, Utkrishthadallirali, Yashtadare Madikettirali, Kashtadallirali, Utkrishthadallirali, Yashtadare Madikettirali, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Yaldo Sishyarupeluva, Krishna Krishna, Yaldo Sishyarupeluva, Ashtakshara Maha Maldradana Mavana ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಿನ್ನ ನಾಮದ ಸ್ಮರಣೆಯ ಸಾರಾಮೃತವು ಎಲ್ಲ ನಾಲಿಗೆ ಬರಲಿ ನಾರಾಯಣ ಸಂತತ ಹರಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಸಾಸಿರ ನಾಮವು ಸಂತತ ಹರಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಸಾಸಿರ ನಾಮವು ಅಂತರಂಗದ ಒಳಗಿರಿಸಿ ಸಂತತ ಹರಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಸಾಸಿರ ನಾಮವು ಅಂತರಂಗದ ಒಳಗಿರಿಸಿ ಎಂತೋ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲರಾಯಣ ಎಂತೋ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲರಾಯಣ ಅಂತ್ಯಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಚಿಂತಿಸೋ ಹಾಗೆ ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಿನ್ನ ನಾಮದ ಸ್ಮರಣೆಯ ಸಾರಾಮೃತವು ಎಲ್ಲ ನಾಲಿಗೆ ಬರಲಿ ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಾರಾಯಣ.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue with the auspicious start by lighting the lamp, the Kuttuvilakku. To do the honors, it gives me great pleasure to invite onto the dais Mrs. Hema Kumar, daughter of LL Narayan, Mrs. Shanti Narayan, daughter of LLN, Mrs. Pushpa Lakshman, Mrs. Jyoti Ganesh, and Mrs. Malavika Harish Lakshman. I now invite Mr. Sumant Narayan, grandson of LLN and son of Dr. Narayan and Mrs. Shanti Narayan, to please come up and garland Mr. LL Narayan's photo. As a token of our appreciation, we would now like to present our lovely singers who sang the invocation with a memento. May I request Mrs. Priya Vinay Lakshman to please come up and present a memento to Miss Pavitra, and Miss Aparna Aditya Ganesh to please come up and present a memento to Miss Vanitha. Thank you very much, ladies, for that mellifluous rendition. And now, to officially welcome the gathering, it is my pleasure to invite to the podium Mr. L. Lakshman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dignitaries in the dais. On behalf of the LLN family, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the Centenary Celebrations. We are delighted the invocation song was rendered by students of the Endowment for Music Education, created in our mother's name and administered by the Music Academy. Our father was not the musical type. His mother and his sisters were wont to claim that in his younger days, he was a good singer and an exponent of the ragam Neelambari. We have taken this untested claim at face value and used Neelambari as overlay for the audiovisual. He was not much of a celebrator either and would not have approved of this event. However, he's present here only in spirit, and therefore his progeny will take some liberties. Born in Vaikam in the Koilon district to Dr. Lakshman Iyer and Parvati Ammal, he spent the best part of his younger days in Kerala. He moved to Madras to pursue higher studies in botany at the Madras Christian College. Not much is known of his academic performance. I remember he telling us he was always third in class from the last. And his advice to us was never to use him as a benchmark for academics. Offered an opportunity to work for Rane as a salesman, he joined Rane Madras in 1940. He impressed the original founder, our grandfather, Mr. Ganapati Iyer, so much so that in 1942, he ended up as his son-in-law. I guess the Kerala chemistry on both sides helped. The annals of Rane has it that LLN had a difference of opinion with Mr. Ganapati Iyer and left Rane in a huff. The family and close friends can easily relate to that. But thanks be to God, he came back to Rane soon. Mr. Ganapati Iyer died in 1946, and the mantle fell upon our father. He held his ground successfully, and the board minutes of December 1947 state, "The board notes with pleasure the remarkable profits during the year, and by way of appreciation, paid him a bonus of rupees 10,000. The minutes also record that a 20% dividend was declared and also an authorization for T.G.K. Raman, the young son of late Ganapati Iyer, to visit the US for training at General Motors. Although a flamboyant salesman known for his innovative methods of selling cars, at heart, LLN was a humble person. Oftentimes, he used to say, "Rane are small people in a business dominated by giants such as Simpson, TVS, and Dadaboy Dagji." He was a keen and astute student of the Indian economy and the motor industry. Without the benefit of corporate planners and McKinsey that we use and still go wrong, he charted out a strategic course for taking Rane into uncharted territory. The board minutes of 24th December 1949 says that LLN proposed that Rane should enter the field of manufacturing. In 1951, he was asked to go to the UK and such other places as necessary to develop the company's business, particularly in the manufacturing field. It took 10 years and a letter of introduction from Mr. Anantaramakrishna of Simpson to get Rane started in manufacturing. Jay, as he was known, saw in our father a spark worth nurturing. Reminiscing on his UK visits, our father would say to him that the UK was a land of a few saints and many dragons. I guess he was reacting to rebuffs to his early overtures. He started driving Rane towards the end of its trading days and on a new road that led to manufacturing. In 1959, the first manufacturing venture was born. This was an audacious move. Even now, when Ganesh and I talk about major new investments, we tremble and recall with admiration the risk-taking ability of our father. Given that his friends were also invited to participate in the equity, it seemed even more audacious. He was truly a visionary with sharp business instincts. Commitment and hard work were his tools of trade. For a botanist, he had come a long way. A very busy father, he naturally had little time for family. Neither did he have the inclination for a game of golf or tennis or short vacations. But the only family outing I recall was a dinner at the Woodlands Hotel, followed by a visit to Quality Ice Cream the very same evening. A lifetime quota of family time was completed in one evening. I recall from my younger days our mother as a very strong, value-driven person who held the family together, and there were many of us. My father was one amongst 10, and my mother one amongst 6. Being torch-bearers for both sides, one can imagine what their lives must have been. And towards this, they gave a lot of their time and effort willingly. His friends, I recall, illustrious people like T.S. Krishna, KSN, T.T. Vasu, S.R. Das, and others from government and industry were of the same ilk, simple people. They operated without calendars, their doors always open. His sense of frugality became the core around which the manufacturing business of Rane developed. To start with, he chose to use a modern jargon, asset-light businesses. He did not procure more land than barely necessary. Given the land prices of today, we still hold that against him. General purpose machines and sometimes used machines were procured. At Rane, frugal engineering was born then. His office was a cordoned off area on the shop floor, which doubled up as a canteen. Low fixed costs and overheads, today's watchwords, came to him naturally. In fact, I do not recall him buying a new car in all his life except once. He was audacious, but a minimalist. He set store in his professional and personal life by how many things he could do without. Oftentimes, I quote an incident which sums up LLN as a businessman. In the early 80s, due to a massive and sudden depreciation of the Indian rupee, Rane Madras faced a huge deficit in their business transactions with Tata Motors. Despite the best efforts of the Rane management, Tata Motors, who had their own share of problems, refused a price adjustment. Our father, who was very well connected with Tata Motors, with people like Jagadish, Mr. Mulgaonkar, and Mr. Talolika, refused to intervene on our behalf. His view was that Tatas had more problems than Rane, and therefore he would not go to them at that juncture. Being a matter of life and death to us, I took it upon myself to approach Mr. Talolika of Tata Motors. He gave me a patient hearing and provided solutions. But his parting shot was, LLN does business with his heart and head, but the next generation seems to use only the head. This defines LLN. The businesses he handed over to the next generation have been successful. Rane today is an acknowledged leader in the automotive component industry. Integrity and business practices are attributes admired by stakeholders at large. Many of them still remember LLN and his ways. A few grudgingly give some credit to the next generation. And we don't mind that because we, like them, believe that the Rane of today would not have been but for LLN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now take pleasure in introducing you all to the chairman of the Sanmar Group, who has now spent close to 50 years in the chemical industry. He started the Sanmar Group 40 years ago. Under his stewardship, the group set up trailblazing chemical ventures in the areas of polyurethanes, polymerization initiators, polysilicon, aroma chemicals, flavors and fragrances, and fumed silica. He is a keen sports enthusiast and has been supporting cricket and tennis in a big way for many years now. He has been the Honorary Consul General for Denmark in South India since 1989. Above all, he and his late father have been friends of the LLN family. Therefore, he is best qualified to talk to us about the LLN Mama he knew. Please welcome Shri N. Shankar, Chairman, Sanmar Group.
Dr. Firodia, Mr. Danino, Mr. Lakshman, Mr. Ganesh, members of Mr. LLN's family, members of the Rane family, ladies and gentlemen. It is a sincere and also a sentimental pleasure for me to stand before you this evening to talk about the LLN Mama I know. I must thank Lakshman for giving me this particular title for my talk, since it allows me to be freewheeling and personal in recalling some of the many memories I have of a personality I remember with great respect and affection. In fact, at this point, I was going to apologize if I was a little irreverent in my talk, but after listening to Babu, I realized that's not necessary. Mr. L.L. Narayan was known by a number of other names: L. Lakshmi Narayanan, LLN, Maapillai, Rane Narayanan, and I'm sure a few more among his close friends. I will refer to him as LLN, which is how he was known among the generation to which I belong, although to me, he will always be Mama. The relationship between LLN's family and ours is now well into the 4th generation. My father, K.S. Narayanan, and LLN were great friends. Lakshman and Ganesh are my contemporaries, and we have shared many experiences through our careers. Our sons are now taking control of our respective businesses, and the 4th generation, the grandsons, are schoolmates and playmates. This relationship extends equally to the distaff side, and my mother and Mrs. LLN were very, very good friends, very, very close, as are the wives of the next couple of generations. Now, being the first speaker, it behooves me to speak of LLN, the man and the industrialist, before I go on to LLN Mama. Although, given how well he is known in Chennai, this will truly be carrying coal to Newcastle. I'm sure many of you have read the excellent book brought out at the Platinum Jubilee of the Rane Group, describing its journey of excellence over its first 75 years. For a major portion of this period, LLN was at the helm, and as you heard from Babu, transformed what is essentially a trading enterprise into an industrial group with several state-of-the-art manufacturing complexes. With his innate business acumen and very strong marketing skills, LLN made a success of all his tasks, and additional responsibility kept accruing to him. And he eventually found the baton passed on to him as he found, and took the trading business as it was then to new heights. And as you heard again, in the 50s, he took up manufacturing, starting at the engine valves, and going on to a host of high-tech auto component products. Today, the Rane Group is recognized as one of the leading component manufacturers by the entire auto industry, apart from being a dependable supplier in the international markets. Rane stuck to the knitting right through the years, its core competency of auto components, and built themselves to a preeminent position in the field. The group is well known for its business practices. Professionalism and ethical governance permeate all through its widespread activities. Their managers enjoy considerable freedom, operational freedom, and there is continuous focus on operational excellence and quality, reflected in the many Deming and other awards that they have received. Rane pays a lot of attention to people development, the latest step in which is the modern Rane Development Center on the outskirts of Chennai. Now, all this has helped the group develop a management philosophy and a culture that engenders loyalty and commitment in its people, its customers, and in fact, all its other constituents. These hallmark qualities of the group, in my opinion, emanated directly from LLN's personal character and philosophy. He was a simple person known for his honesty, integrity, and intelligence, apart from, of course, his entrepreneurial qualities. LLN Mama was truly simple in everything, including his attire, which was always a trademark white slack shirt and white pants for work, and white jibba and dhoti when off-duty. Apart from these, and the suits he had to wear when traveling or for special business occasions, I can't remember him ever dressed in any other fashion. Another attribute of his simplicity was that he would always sit in the front seat of the car with the driver, and as you heard from Babu, it was always not a new car. LLN was soft-spoken, and I remember him having an impish sense of humor and a permanent twinkle in his eye. He was somewhat reserved and had a limited circle of friends, but within that circle, he was open and friendly. Like many others, he was a smoker in the early days, but gave it up later. However, he never took a drink in Madras. Of course, I am told and by others that once the Indian Airlines plane took off from Meenambakam, things were a little different. Work was worshipped LLN. He was promptly at the office at 8 a.m. every morning, a habit, in fact, that I know that Lakshman continued, in fact, even advanced to 7:30. He visited all the plants regularly and interacted with the senior managers. He was strict and demanding and expected frankness and straightforward behavior from everyone in Rani. He traveled quite a bit, both in India and abroad, mainly to keep up the excellent personal relations he had built up over the years with customers, government officials, and collaborators. But his trips at that time were legendarily short. I remember he would make trips to London where he would turn around in a day or two, which was unusual for those days. Today, of course, it happens quite often. And if I remember, incidentally, when traveling, he preferred not to go first class. While work was indeed religion to him, LLN did not fall short in meeting his responsibilities to society. There were several initiatives that he was personally involved in. For example, education. He was a strong supporter of the Ganapatha Iyer Girls High School, which I believe operates from the family house in Gopalapuram, which was made over to it. The Meenakshi College in Kodambakam is another institution that benefited from his involvement. The Margaret Sidney Hospital in Nanganallur stands testimony to his activities in the fields of healthcare. LLN's commitment to society is now embedded in various CSR initiatives of the Rane Group, one of the most recent and outstanding being the setting up of the Rane Polytechnic on the outskirts of Trichy a few years ago. Now, let me now turn to my personal recollections of LLN Mama. When I first entered business in the 60s, the Rane companies, Rane Madras, Engine Valves, Rane Brake Linings, were held in a sort of awe. They had, of course, excellent profitability and growth. But what was especially impressive, at least to me, was most of them were debt-free and had very good cash reserves. In those days, when debt equities of 1-4 and 1-5, and I came from such a company were the norm, this really stood out. They had an enviable slate of products with the latest technologies secured through foreign collaborations and joint ventures with international leaders in the respective fields. Now, you must realize this was the 60s. This has become much more common now, but what really stood out in the 60s. And so good was the choice of products by LLN and the technology that he tied up for them, that for many years, these products dominated the domestic auto component market. In the process of setting up and progressing these joint ventures, LLN established excellent personal and business relationships with the partners. And these relationships helped nurture the alliances over long periods through good times and bad. I found this a fascinating model and adopted it in a major way with good results. when I set up our own engineering and chemical companies. Not everyone will agree, but I believe if properly worked, the joint venture is the best form of business alliance over the medium to long term for technology products. And I must thank LLN Mama for inspiring me to this approach through his own success with it in the early days. LLN also helped me in other ways, many other ways, and I was taking my first steps as an entrepreneur. My father, who was at the time primarily involved in cement and other large process industry, suggested that I seek advice from LLN as to areas where I could be investing in the engineering sector as a diversification. I went over and talked to him, and Mama spent several hours with me at that time and asked me to make an application for the manufacture of hydraulics assemblies. I must confess I was clueless about the product or its market, but I followed his suggestions blindly. In fact, he also had discussions with a potential German partner for technology. He helped me fill out the application for the letter of intent and foreign collaboration, which I duly submitted. And with his help, I did finally get a letter of intent. Unfortunately, other issues cropped up, and I could not proceed further. And this was certainly my loss. As it happens, hydraulics was an excellent choice, and companies that invested in it at that time did extremely well. Notwithstanding this, I have been forever grateful to LLN Mama for the sincerity with which he guided me and the time he spent with me. I really learned a lot from that experience. Another incident from those days stands out in my memory. When I did finally set up my first engineering venture, a company called Durametallic India Limited, I was very, very keen on getting LLN's good wishes and blessings. So I personally drove out, picked him up on a Sunday morning, and drove him out to the project site that I acquired on the old Mahabalipuram road. Now, OMR in the 70s was not what it is today. It was relatively unknown as a location for industrial or commercial investment. In fact, the plot I bought had actually been a rice field. My purchase included a solidly constructed building and about 15 acres of land, which I showed off very proudly to LLN. Now, having heard Baba, you'll know what his reaction was. To my chagrin, Mama was caustic in her observations. He bluntly told me that I had wasted a lot of money for unnecessary land and concrete buildings, which the project didn't need, and that too in a very out-of-the-way place. To start off, I should have rented a shed in Ambattur or Thiruvatiyur, which were the industrial centers then, and saved on initial capital investment. I can tell you I was totally crestfallen and came back quite upset and told my father that I seemed to have made a huge mistake. And I spent a sleepless night wondering how to retrace my steps. However, and this is the greatness of the man, next morning he called me again and asked me to come over to his office. And he told me that he had studied the project report that I had given to him, and he found it quite promising. While he emphasized that he still held his views on unnecessary land and buildings, he felt that I was going in the right direction and asked me to proceed, and did give me a lot of encouragement. Now, this was my first business venture, and to my good fortune, it has been quite successful over the years. But I give a lot of the credit for this to LLN and his guidance and blessings, which I sought very often in the early stages. He was willing to speak the facts as he saw them, rather than sugarcoat them to make me feel good. And this advice on avoiding unnecessary expenditure at the project stage is something I have kept in mind all these years and has worked well for me. And as you heard from Babu, I presume it has worked very well for them too. On a personal level also, Mrs. and Mrs. LLN did so much for our family, and particularly my wife Chandra and me. In the early hours of our marriage, we were next-door neighbors to them. And Mami was a great source of support to my wife as she struggled to make a go of our household. The LLN's first-floor bedroom window overlooked our lawn. And I remember one night when we had a party at home, and Chandra had underestimated the appetite of our guests. She was at her wit's end on how to continue to keep our guests fed when there was a shout from the next door window. And this was Mrs. LLN calling over, asking her to send somebody over to collect the stock of dosas and avial she had made on her own anticipating that my wife in her inexperience may have misjudged the quantities of food required. She truly saved us a lot of blushes that day. But I point this out as the sort of thoughtfulness that we took for granted from Mama and Mami and will always remember with fondness and gratitude. LLN and my father were great friends for about 6 decades. There was a group of industrialists at that time who, although operating in different areas, shared great camaraderie and helped each other in different ways from time to time. You saw a lot of the pictures in the show that was there earlier. Apart from father and LLN, this group included, for example, Mam and Mapla of MRF, T.S. Narayan Swamy, A.M.M. Arunachalam of the TI Group, T.S. Krishna of TVS, H.C. and D.C. Kothari, M.H. Chidambaram, Marudha Pillai, and so many others. This group represented a generation of pioneering industrialists who, in what I believe was the golden era of industrialization in Madras State, which was catalyzed by Sri R. Venkataraman's Industries Minister, this group set up large greenfield projects in a variety of fields: cement, chemicals, aluminum, shipping, sugar, fertilizer, name what you have. And more important, they also helped each other in many ways. In fact, I have one episode to illustrate this. In the 70s, a large group from Bombay launched a takeover bid on the shipping company that India Cements had promoted, South India Shipping Corporation. They had contracted to buy the holding of the foreign collaborator, which would give them management control. However, after some discussions, the collaborator agreed to give India Cements the first right of refusal, provided they could come up with the required funds within a specified period of time. Now, this was a difficult period for the cement industry, and the amount was also large for that day. The collaborator therefore imposed a condition that India Cements should get 2 other businessmen of standing to guarantee the payment. Father, his mind out of India Cements, went to 2 of his closest friends, LL Narayan and Maman Mapillai, and both of them, without an instant's hesitation, signed the guarantee. This was an extraordinary act of faith and commitment which helped the transaction go through. The transaction also had support from this group of industrialists. Now, I say this to highlight the trust, goodwill, and cooperation that existed among the industrial community in Madras those days, and really made for a certain atmosphere of doing business which was different, I would say. On the personal front, LLN, although Babu says he didn't play tennis, was a part of my father's morning tennis group at MCC for a few years. He fitted in nicely playing with friends like G. Ramanathan, Mohiddin and others. But this was probably because the conversation and banter took precedence over the sport. He would also frequently drop in at my father's regular rummy game, and although he did not play himself, he would sit there for hours offering suggestions, comments, and generally having a good time with the group. Incidentally, the same group also took an annual sojourn to Banatirtham in the hills near Tinnevelly, a sort of pilgrimage come holiday. This is connected with a religious festival where thousands of devotees who came for a holy bath were fed and provided accommodation. Now, when I say accommodation, it was truly basic and truly rustic. There was no running water or electricity. It was absolutely back to nature. And this group from Chennai also really went back to nature for those few days, but everyone had a great time. I have wonderful photographs of LLN, father, and others sitting happily in a jungle stream, in a flowing jungle stream, wearing only dhotis, performing their Sanya Vandanams and Tarpanams. Ladies and gentlemen, LLN was a great mentor, as the interaction I had with him in my early days proved to me. This mentoring has obviously paid good dividends in Rane and clearly shows in the way the group has developed through Lakshman and Ganesh. Rane has grown from strength to strength, building on the wonderful foundations established by LLN, expanding manifold, and taking up a slew of new products. The transition to the 3rd generation also promises to be equally smooth and seamless. I'm sure Mama is looking on proudly, smiling at the achievements of his children and grandchildren. On this very auspicious occasion of the centenary of Mr. LL Narayan, we remember him as an individual who personified the best of both the professional and personal worlds. Ethics, integrity, professionalism, and growth blended with financial conservatism are the hallmarks of Rane's culture, all of which had their roots in LLN's personality and management style. On the personal side, simplicity, warmth, friendship, and loyalty are the values that Mama adhered to and has embedded in his family. Truly a legacy to be proud of. Babu, Ganesh, thank you for again inviting me to pay my tribute to LLN Mama today. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Our next speaker is the chairman of Force Motors Limited, who joined the board of the company in 1975 and led the company as managing director till 2009. He is also chairman of other group companies. At various times, he's been the president of the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, the president of the Automotive Research Association of India, and the president of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce, among others. Force Motors is a pioneer in the automobile industry in India for the last 60 years, having manufactured tempo three-wheeler auto rickshaws, matadors, and other iconic vehicles. It is focused on producing utilitarian, cost-effective products, especially made to suit the Indian economy and rural environment. The company has excellent research and development facilities. They manufacture engines for automobile majors like Mercedes and BMW and have recently signed an agreement with the Rolls-Royce Power Systems AG to jointly produce engines for power generation and rail application. The group employs more than 10,000 people. Over the years, he has continued his family tradition of commitment to society. He is chairman of the Gandhi National Memorial Society, Pune, the president of the Ahmednagar Education Society, chairman of Sri Firodia Trust and Multan Chand Bora Trust, founded by his ancestors, active in providing relief and support in the field of healthcare, education, and social welfare, and is closely associated with many other social, educational and healthcare institutions. He is also the recipient of multiple prestigious awards and accolades. To speak to us on entrepreneurship in the 50s and 60s, please welcome Dr. Abhay Firodia.
My friend Babu Lakshman, Mr. Shankar, Mr. Danino, Ganesh, members of the LL Narayan family and the Rane family, ladies and gentlemen, I am privileged to have been invited to speak to this august gathering on this memorable occasion of the centenary of Mr. Lakshmi Narayan. I knew him, but I can't say I knew him very well. I met him on a number of occasions, and what I recall is the sparkle in his eyes. He had a penetrating look. When he talked to you, you felt that he knew more about what you are saying and what you are than he would let you know. He had that kind of a personality. He was witty, as I remember from some of the interactions that took place in the Auto Component Manufacturers Association when I had just, as a rookie, joined the committee and he had attended one or two meetings. And he left a very indelible impression on my mind of a person who is energetic. He was a small-built man, but he gave you the impression that he was much bigger than he was, and it is true. It is a matter of record and pride for all of us that he was a pioneer, he was a visionary,
and contributed to the building not only of the Rane Group, but if I may say so, of building the backbone of India's component industry by doing what he did and inspiring so many. I understood from my father, who knew Mr. Lakshmi Narayan very well, of his very audacious efforts to build difficult automotive components, of his transition from trading in automobiles to manufacturing. This is a very important step that he took. And I recall my father having made a number of tests and explained in his writings of what is an entrepreneur. And when my friend Babu asked me to speak about entrepreneurship in the 50s and 60s and in relation to Mr. Narayan, I looked up those points. The first question as to whether you are an entrepreneur or not is whether I have enough self-confidence. The second question is whether I have confidence in my venture. The third is whether I'm willing to make sacrifices. The fourth is, do I recognize opportunity? The fifth is, am I decisive? Am I able to come to a conclusion and move forward, or do I vacillate and procrastinate? And am I willing to lead by an example? And I think Mr. Lakshmi Narayan, if you read his biography and the history of the Rane Group, and as most of us here have met him and known him, he met all these criteria. But above all, he built the values that have defined the activity of the Rane Group. And those values are very important. Without the backbone of those values, entrepreneurship is not possible. India's last president, Dr. Abdul Kalam, once said, he gave a formula for India. He said, E is equal to FP. E is education, and FP is future prosperity. And recently, my friend Dr. Mashelkar, who was the chairman of the CSIR at a public meeting in Pune, when both of us were on the stage, said this, that this is what is needed for India. Mashelkar is a chemist. Abdul Kalam was a physicist. I'm a nobody. But I felt compelled to say that I don't agree. And I said that it is not E is equal to FP, but actually E plus E is equal to P. E is education. The second E is enterprise. And P is prosperity. So without enterprise, it is not possible only on the strength of education to create prosperity. Entrepreneurship is the key, it is the catalyst, it is what creates prosperity, it is what creates progress. So entrepreneurship is something which is very personal, it's in a person. They say that machines and computers cannot create anything new in themselves. It requires human thought, it requires inspired leadership, it requires courage to achieve innovation. And innovation is the heart of enterprise. And I find that this courage that is so necessary, this inspiration that is so necessary for enterprise was present to an extraordinary degree in Mr. Lakshminarayan. Now, to speak of enterprise and entrepreneurship in the 50s and 60s, we must spend some time to look at what was the socio-political backdrop of the 50s and 60s. India became independent in 1947. Many of us think that we became independent. Actually, 1947 was the annus horribilis. It was a terrible year. We did not become independent, we got divided. We were broken. Misery on an unparalleled scale happened in India in 1947. Lakhs of people were murdered, displaced, had to be resettled. And all this happened within a few months of August 47. So at that time, when India became independent, we also were grievously hurt. The entire national leadership at that time was busy trying to resettle refugees, trying to restore calm and peace, trying to avoid sectoral and anti-religious riots. Nobody had time for nation building. It took 6 months before the country became quiet, end of 1947. In less than 6 months of independence, Mahatma Gandhi was murdered. He was killed. Mahatma Gandhi was the leader of the Congress party. And the Congress party was in charge of the country. And it was leaderless, it was rudderless. They say that Nehru was appointed the heir of Gandhi. If you want to look at the economic history of India, you would do a lot of injustice if you believed in this. Nehru was the transition prime minister. Nehru was not recommended by the Congress party. Every state Congress party committee had proposed the name of Patel. Each and every. Gandhi chose Nehru with two caveats. One, India is going to have a long transition. Nobody knew what the shape of freedom would be. Where would be Pakistan? Where would be Hindustan? How we will start governing this huge land. So they needed somebody who could relate to, talk to, think like, talk like, behave like an Englishman. Nehru was an Englishman. He has said that I am Hindu by birth, Muslim by culture, and Christian by education. He was not Hindu by thinking. Second caveat, besides this transition business, was Gandhi's concern that the Congress party must be disbanded. It was built for a certain purpose. The purpose was served. So Nehru happened. He happened because Gandhi died. He happened because within 2 years, Sardar Patel died. He died in 1950. So there was Nehru. There was the Congress party, which was not disbanded. and there was our country. I don't know how many of you have read Nehru's book. He has written 2 books, Glimpses of World History and another one on India. When I was a student, I had read it, but I had forgotten. When my son was young, my father said, get him that book, let him read it. I don't know whether my son read it or not, but I read it again. And in that book, Nehru has said, in 1927, writing from Naini prison to his daughter, that, dear Hindu, if ever India becomes independent, we must follow the Soviet system of economics. Very clear. We must have central planning. We cannot trust the capitalists of India. Free market economics does not work. These are his words. Please look them up. So here was a man who defined the socio-political, socio-economic canvas of India, on which people like LL Narayan and others had to industrialize India. And what was that canvas? Over 150 years from the beginning of the 19th century, the Peshwa was destroyed in 1818, and the British really established their Raj in the first decade of the 19th century. Till 1950, a number of important thinkers in India established an ethic. Ramakrishna Paramahans, Vivekanand, Tagore, Tilak, Gandhi, they gave a credo for India. It was belief in Indian values. It was traditional Indian values with modern thinking. Vivekananda spoke of uplifting those in poverty. Tilak spoke of freedom. And Tagore spoke of the greatness of our land. The socio-political and socio-economic canvas of India was altered at that time when freedom came, and a socialist regime was imposed on this country. All enterprise, all business that took place in the 50s and 60s happened on the backdrop of a rapidly socializing economic scenario. Socialistic pattern of society was imposed on our country. The establishment of industry was started by Indians in the private sector. I do not know how many people here are aware of the fact that by 1958, India already had large automobile factories with very high local content. And in late 50s, people like Rane had started to make auto components and had reached very high levels of ability to produce what was required in India. At that time, there was not a single public sector enterprise in India. The entire agriculture, the entire trade, the entire banking, the entire textile industry, the entire engineering industry, steel, you name it, was in the private sector. Suddenly, in the 50s, the backdrop was changed. Public sector and permit Raj and licenses and the DGTD and the CCI, Controller of Capital Issues, all of these came in a big way. And they created a situation where entrepreneurs were not encouraged, but were controlled. So it is over this control that one had to grow. I don't know whether Babu remembers, but in 1982, we went to Korea. Babu was in the delegation. I was there. The Hyundai company at that time had come out with their first indigenous car made in Korea called the Pony. It was a very ordinary car. And we went to the factory and we saw a magnificent factory, huge capacities, modern infrastructure. And when we asked, why you have this? So much money you have put. The answer was, we are mandated by our government to double capacity every year, to buy the best technology, to become export competitive, and to become world class. What was happening in India? All the automobile manufacturers were restrained because the taxes were on the car, passenger car, the tax was 65% excise duty. Sales tax was separate. So the backdrop for entrepreneurship in India was loaded against the entrepreneur. It was loaded in favor of the public sector. And it is on this background that people had to struggle. And struggle they did. The manufacturers who succeeded had to battle with these odds, but they came up with gems of companies, many of which are flourishing today. Example in Chennai is Rane, it's TVS, it's Simpson. You go to Pune and you go to some of the other cities of India, many of those establishments which were made at that time have survived today. But in spite of some legacy of that period which still survives, Planning Commission is disbanded, DGTD is disbanded, Controller of Capital Issues is disbanded, but the Industries Disputes Act continues. In the book about Rane, there are references to issues relating to problems with the labor. I think the LL Narayan family handled their labor relations with a great deal of benevolence and wisdom. They did not have serious problems, many others had. But the Industries Disputes Act is actually Industries Disputes Encouragement Act. Earlier, you used to have the Industries Relations Act, where there was an industry and a single union in the industry. And the entire industry and the entire workforce negotiated, and there was no factory level discussion. And if they could not reach a solution, the government intervened. By making the Industries Disputes Act, the communists in the government ensured that there could be industries disputes in every factory. Were very good for the business of running unions, very good for disruption. So it is aspects like this which created hurdles. Babu mentioned about the very frugal approach of Mr. Lakshmi Narayan to investments. But do you know that at that time, the Controller of Capital Issues forbade you from raising capital unless he gave permission. You could not increase your share capital. If you wanted a loan, you had to go to a nationalized bank after Indira Gandhi nationalized the banks, and they wouldn't give you loans. So the backdrop for enterprise was one where capital was controlled, capacity was controlled, all materials were scarce. And it is in this background that these people built the enterprises that have done India proud. My personal opinion is that one of the greatest entrepreneurs of the 20th century was a man called Walchand Hirachand. He created premier automobiles from scratch. He created Hindustan Aeronautics and actually built aircraft within 2 years of starting the factory. He created a construction company. He created a sugar mill. So enterprise could flourish, but Walchand was there before the Nehruvian socialist ethic kicked in. After that, they systematically dismantled and destroyed this private enterprise. In today's context, when you look back at the 50s and 60s, you see that much of this constraining background is gone. Partly it is gone because under duress, the Narasimha Rao government did away with many of the constraints, not out of a belief, but under duress. For the first time in India's history, today changes are happening, which are happening as a matter of policy. They are happening with a view of the future. Political capital is being spent in order to create reforms which are meant to strengthen industry, meant to strengthen trade and commerce. I strongly believe that the main contribution of the entrepreneurs of the 50s and 60s is not what they localized, in what they manufactured. It is the fact that they have created institutions. Rane today is an institution. It is not just a company. It is an institution. Thousands of people believe in their work ethic. There are systems, there are organizations, there are methods, there are compliances. That institution, creation, was the real contribution of men like LL Narayan. These institutions are the ones on which the next generation builds. Every new generation stands on the shoulder of the previous generation, and they are able to see farther. They are able to do something which is different and more far-reaching. So it is these institutions that were created by LL Narayan and his compatriots, people at that time in the industry, that are the backbone of our industry today. That is the reason tens of thousands of people are employed, lakhs of people have got trained. It is the institutions which will hold true in future. And these institutions cannot be built within 5 or 10 years. They take decades. And the contribution that industrialists like LL Narayan made in the 50s and 60s was to create these institutions, to instill these values, to propagate the ethic that you have to do it in India, you have to manufacture, you have to create jobs, you have to protect the customer, you have to protect the other stakeholders, and you must be profitable. You are not a charity, you are a business. You do your charity separately, but ensure your business runs. Those values are the values which define the strength for the future. And I'm convinced that this is now gelled in our country. Our country has immensely benefited from the efforts, the sacrifices, the foresight, the vision of people like LL Narayan, who in the 50s and 60s till he retired, kept on in the direction of industrialization, of enterprise, of building an institution, of putting in values, and that is for the good of our country. The future generation will have different battles. Their battle is not going to be building institutions. Their battle is not going to be localization. Their battle is not going to be to make it in India. Their battle is going to be to scale up, to stay relevant on a rapidly changing technological background. the rate of change of technology is so high that the engine wall business in future with electromobility will struggle. Though the steering business will do wonderfully well. I am not giving any advice to my friend Babu or to Ganesh here, but I'm only saying that the canvas of technology is so rapidly changing, and you are confidently looking at it based on the entrepreneurial spirit you have imbibed, based on the institution you have inherited, based on the business you have built upon, bequeathed by the great man LL Narayan. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, sir, for that very illuminating address. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to speak to us on the topic of business and culture, we have with us today a gentleman who was born in France, came to India in 1977, and is now an Indian citizen. He is a celebrated historian who has many publications to his credit. Researching the origins of Indian civilization, he has great insights into India and its people from prehistoric to current times. He has lectured at educational and cultural institutions all over India and published papers on the Indus-Saraswati civilization, the Aryan problem, India's scientific and technological heritage, ecological issues, and the challenges faced by Indian culture today. He has even done original research into the mathematics and metrology behind the town planning of some cities. Who better than he to talk to us about business and culture? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Padma Shri Michelle Danino.
Mr. Babu Lakshman, Mr. Shankar, Dr. Firodia, Mr. Ganesh, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to stand before you on this very august occasion. When Mr. Babu Lakshman invited me to speak on this topic, I had a slight hesitation because my acquaintance with the world of business is extremely limited. However, I'm delighted that the previous three speakers have already used words like culture, ethics, values, and in fact, this has been a constant. Perhaps I will hopefully be able to illustrate this. This has been a constant in the history of Indian business that these notions, these concepts have been very present and visibly at work in them. So in fact, I remember an occasion where I was teaching a course on Indian culture at the Indian Institute of Management, Ranchi, at the request of the then director, and I was discussing over breakfast with a professor of marketing who asked me what I was doing there, and I said slightly shyly that I was teaching Indian culture. And his answer was very striking to me and unexpected to me. He said, "I'm very glad that somebody is teaching this, because without understanding the culture of the land, you cannot do good marketing." Now, to me, this was a revelation, and I think that there is a lot of intersections between those two fields. If I may start I'm going to use the support of a few slides to express a few thoughts on business and culture. And in fact, this story begins very long ago. Indians have been entrepreneurs for something like 4,600 years ago. You see here in the red disc, more or less the geographic expanse of the Indus civilization, 2600 BC. And very strangely, for reasons which are still not understood, these people who are called the Harappans expand purely for trade reasons. They travel to Central Asia, they travel to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf, they travel to Iran, and they sell goods. They sell, in particular, things like jewelry. They were expert jewelers, workers of semi-precious stones. These actually have been excavated in Mesopotamia. They were making beautiful combs and of ivory, various kinds of pottery, and shell objects, exquisite shell objects. And they had secrets, technological secrets on how to handle and prepare those artifacts, which were prized all the way to the royal families of Mesopotamia. The mystery here is, why did they do it? Because absolutely nothing of those civilizations has been found back here in India. Almost not a single Mesopotamian or Iranian or Central Asian object or artifact has been found in any of the Harappan sites. So it looks as if they did not really need anything from those regions of the world. Their own artifacts have been found all over those regions. They were basically entrepreneurs. What were they getting back to India is still a matter of speculation. It doesn't matter. What I want to highlight here is the entrepreneur spirit. The fact that they traveled to faraway regions, and it was difficult and perhaps dangerous in those days, and yet they didn't shy from it. Let us jump 2,000 years towards the present and come back to a few centuries BC, about 300 BC, 400 BC at the most, and this is a very busy region, a very busy part of the world, where you see all these coastal sites and ports of initially Western India, later on Eastern India also, trading with the Roman Empire, the Roman world, all the way to the top left of the slide, the Mediterranean world, and trading mostly through the Red Sea, a little bit through the Persian Gulf also. And you see the Romans here being the main agents of the trade and coming all the way to Indian ports to actually buy stuff from India. Mostly timber, spices, and pepper in particular, jewelry also, semi-precious stones, and in exchange selling very little of their own goods. We have almost a repetition where we see the outflow of Indian goods towards the Mediterranean world, and we don't see much inflow from that trade into India. And one of the prominent historians of the Roman Empire, writing in the 1st century, Pliny the Elder, complains. He complains that, as you can see by the lowest reckoning, India, China, and the Arab Peninsula draw from our empire 100 million sesterces every year. That is the sum which our luxuries and our women cost us. Women perhaps because of the jewelry that was imported from India. In no year does India, and he names India, absorb less than 50 million sesterces of our empire's wealth, sending back merchandise to be sold with us at 100 times its prime cost. And in fact, certain historians have even speculated that this drain of the wealth of the Roman Empire into India contributed perhaps to the eventual fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, this is a matter of speculation, but the fact is there. And these are examples of Indian textiles found in ancient Egypt. Statuettes, figurines were imported by the Romans. You have a beautiful apsara here of ivory coming out of Pompeii. You have heard, of course, of that fabulous Roman city which was buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and found almost intact. And quite a lot of Indian artifacts were unearthed there. In Tamil Nadu, we have the privilege of having the highest concentration of Roman coins from all over India. And in particular, Kongu Nadu and Western Tamil Nadu is full of them. And beautiful Roman coins, some of them made of gold, like this one, which reads Augustus Divi Filius, which means Augustus, son of God. And this one comes from Pudukkottai. And what you see crossing the face of Augustus is a rather crude test cut. This is a cut that someone made at that time to test the authenticity of the metal, because Roman coins were so massively imported into India that certain Roman traders were tempted to make counterfeits. And Indians, as always, did not lag far behind. They also made counterfeits of Roman coins because they became the local currencies. So historians have to struggle, numismats have to struggle with Roman-made counterfeits and Indian-made counterfeits of the Roman coins. This is simply to show you the kind of complexities that can come with trade and business. And we have plenty of evidence in India. Some coins, like this one, top left, or paintings at Ajanta, for example, here, of ships being built. I mean, shipbuilding became a very big industry in India. And we have a lot of texts also talking of traders going to distant lands, and this mostly includes Southeast Asia, the whole peninsula, Indonesia, and beyond. So Indians, once again, were entrepreneurs willing to take a lot of risks for the sake of business, and even though there was nothing very essential that India was missing and that they were importing back into India. The Silk Roads also are being spoken of again, and were among the main channels of communication between the Eastern world all the way to China and the Western world. And you see here in red the overland silk routes, which are the ones usually talked about, but the ones in blue, the so-called maritime Silk Road, was equally important and in fact became the main channel of the Indian business eventually. And we have here a very striking summary of the whole business picture, which was compiled by an American economist, Angus Madison, who passed away a couple of years ago, who tried to compile data from all the sources he could get and reconstructed the picture of the world GDP for the past 2,000 years. And you see at the extreme left, at the top of the chart is India. India producing something like 33% of the world GDP, followed by China. I added the colors to the charts. China at about 27%, which means that India plus China controls 60% of the world GDP, the production of business goods. There are some fluctuations, and then suddenly, after the 1700s, the Indian GDP drops down dramatically. This is, of course, the time of the rise of the colonial power in India, the British power. China benefits for a while because much of the trade that India loses is diverted to it, but then she also succumbs to colonialism, and therefore her own GDP collapses. And we see the British GDP benefiting somewhat from this because, of course, the British were masters at controlling and dictating the rules of world business. And, of course, the American GDP rising also very fast, but that is a different story altogether. Now, this business took place within a certain cultural framework. And we can see some of those values testified to from various sources. Strabo, for example, a great Greek historian and geographer from the 1st century BC, had this very important testimony, and I'm not going to read the whole of it, Well, perhaps this one is very important. He says, all Indians live a simple life, so simple living, but their greatest self-restraint pertains to theft, and that too among a people who use unwritten laws only. And this was something very striking for the Greeks, that Indians could manage themselves without written laws. Their simplicity is also proven in their laws and contracts, which arises from the fact that they are not litigious, how things have changed, as you can see. For they do not have lawsuits over their pledges or deposits, or have need of witnesses or seals. They trust persons with whom they stake their interest. And this is something that is repeated into more and more testimonies, that Indians are trustworthy people and their business is essentially based on trust much more than on written documents. Further, they generally leave unguarded what they have at their homes. So this is an example of a testimony. If I jump another 1,000 years, I come to the 11th century and I take a Muslim geographer, Al-Idrisi, who writes, Indians are naturally inclined to justice and never depart from it in their actions. Their good faith, honesty, and fidelity in their engagements are well known, and they are so famous for these qualities that people flock to their country from every side. So now we are told that ethics and values actually promotes business. This is what Al-Idrisi states. When Max Müller, the famous German but British turned Indologist of the 19th century, summarized some of these quotations, he said, "It is surely extremely strange that whenever, either in Greek or in Chinese or in Persian or in Arab writings, we meet with any attempts at describing the distinguishing features in the national character of the Indians, regard for truth and justice should always be mentioned first." And this is what Indians were actually renowned for in all the cultures they were interacting with. I would like to very briefly outline now the classical parameters of business, or rather economics. Economics, as you know, is artha in Sanskrit, but artha means more than just wealth. It also comes along with a certain injunction, the concept of purushartha, which, as you know, is dharma, kama, artha, moksha. So in this concept, in this framework, and this is something which has, to me, been quite embedded in Indian culture and practiced to a fairly wide extent. Of course, we can always point to exceptions if we like. Both kama and artha were regarded as perfectly legitimate parts of human living, but provided they were within the framework of dharma. So what does artha with dharma mean in practice? It simply means this, that the wealth that you generate or accumulate has to benefit the society. If it is simply selfishly accumulating wealth, then there is something deeply wrong with the whole concept of artha. And this is something that, with time, I could have illustrated from a number of ancient texts, but which I have found personally, and my acquaintances with a certain number of family business houses in India, I will not give names, but over the years, quite a few, has actually convinced me that this concept of benefiting the society, the world at large. For example, if I may take one example, Mr. B.H. Jain, which I believe, Dr. Firodia, you also knew quite well, Bhau, as he was called, who passed away recently, his motto was very simple. It was, "I want to leave the world a better place than I found it." This was his stated motto. This is precisely the whole philosophy ancient philosophy of Artha. So Kautilya, who writes this extremely interesting book, Arthashastra, on governance, administration, and economics, tells us all state activity depend first on the treasury, the wealth. Therefore, a king shall devote his best attention to it. Then he moves on to taxation. And perhaps Jawaharlal Nehru, whom Dr. Firodia mentioned, could have taken a leaf out of this chapter. Just as one plucks fruits from a garden as they ripen, so shall a king have the revenue collected as it becomes due. But just as one does not collect unripe fruits, he shall avoid taking wealth that is not due, because that will make the people angry and spoil the very sources of revenue. So you see that there is a lot of care, and there would be many more extracts from Kautilya to show that things have to be just and fair. He says the root of wealth is economic activity, and lack of it brings material distress. This is an echo of the 1960s, perhaps. In the absence of fruitful economic activity, both current prosperity and future growth are in danger of destruction. And then there are interesting nuggets. I will select only one to show that there is some control. There is also a need for the state to control what happens. I mean, taxation is unavoidable. It should be fair. And he explains how the traders come to the city. They come to trade their wealth. They also come for protection because they have security within the city. And he writes, traders shall declare the quantity and price of the goods that have arrived at the foot of the flag before the city gate. If there is competition among buyers, the increase in price together with the duty shall go to the treasury. If the trader declares the quantity of the goods or the price to be less than it actually is, so as to lower the duty, the king shall confiscate the difference, or the trader shall pay 8 times the duty. So we have here a hint at possible malpractices that, of course, will unavoidably arise here and there in the world of trade. So he almost seems to contradict the Greek and Arab observers of Indian honesty, and probably both are true. So here we have an interesting insight. And Kautilya also speaks a lot about corruption among government officials and how, checks and balances have to be kept to maintain corruption at the lowest possible level. He seems to consider that some amount of corruption is always going to exist, but that a fair king, keeping a sharp eye on whatever happens in his kingdom, keeping reports, keeping well informed, should be able to minimize this corruption to the least possible amount. If I move lastly to the present era, we have different inspiring pictures. And I start with one which seems to be almost the antithesis of the Indian spirit of entrepreneurship. I still wanted to mention him because Jagadish Chandra Bose had a very important role in building some of the building blocks of modern India. He was a physicist, a biologist, a botanist, also a writer of science fiction. He is the real inventor of wireless transmission. It was not Marconi. This has been accepted by the IEEE. 1 year before Marconi, Jagadish Chandra Bose demonstrated actually wireless transmission. But unlike Marconi, Jagadish Chandra Bose refused to take a patent. It was Marconi who did so. And he refused in a long letter to Tagore of 1901. He explained his reasons. And he said that he was approached by a very aggressive American businessman who said, I will do all the job for you. I will take care of the patents. Of course, I will take a commission. But, together we can make a lot of money. And he was put off by that attitude, perhaps because he didn't feel, the dharma part of this artha. And therefore, he did not take patents, and all the benefit eventually went to Marconi. This, in a way, is also an Indian cultural attitude, that knowledge is not, and actually he wrote as much, knowledge cannot be a personal property. It is not something that should be exploited financially. So we do have here a contradiction, a clash with the modern Western concept of intellectual property. And, well, of course, we have to pragmatically try to manage this the best we want. Another great figure of the early 20th century is Prafulla Chandra Ray, because his line was a little bit different. He was also, like Bose, a great scientist, inventor, chemist in his case, but he was living at the time of Swadeshi, the need to rebuild India on its own economic foundations. And he was known for his philanthropy, the way he helped students in great need, but whatever little money he could earn from his salary, and he lived like an ascetic in a bare room of Calcutta University for decades, whatever he could earn, he invested as a capital for chemical industries in Bengal. He was the founder of the Bengal Chemical and Pharmaceutical Works, for example, and several others. And his technique was that as soon as one of those industries were standing strongly on its legs, he would withdraw from it, leave it to the team he had created, and start and create another industry. So here we see how unexpectedly a scientist actually promoted business and industry. And he had, as I said, many charitable activities. Finally, today, well, I should not be saying this to this august gathering because you know it better than I do. Much of the actual percentage, mass of Indian business is still family-driven and therefore still value-driven. And we know that there is a kind of a contradiction because we're trying to push consumption. This is especially the Western way of doing business. But the Indian ethos has not been towards excessive consumption. It has managed to prioritize savings at the same time. I mean, an interesting piece of statistics is that Indian households own $200 billion of gold. And most of them, of course, women, as we know it. This is half of India's bank deposits. So these values are at work through the society, and it means that much of the business remains semi-traditional. Of course, things are changing fast. Nevertheless, there are inspiring examples of trust-based transactions which still require very few documents. I've heard of many examples. I'm taking only the case of the diamond carriers between Mumbai and Surat. You know that Surat is one of the world center for diamond cutting. And how, till recently, how were those diamonds transported between the point of import and export, Mumbai and Surat, simply by using the services of a particular community of farmers, local farmers, and you might have seen them, who have those huge white turbans, and the diamonds were within the turban. And there was a sub-clan of this community who would communicate with each other through coded gestures. They would warn themselves if there was anything suspicious, and they would not speak to each other, and they used a train between Mumbai and Surat with no security, no written documents to transport those diamonds, and till recently, this is what was being used. So there are very interesting documents in this way, and of course we've all heard of the Mumbai Dapawalas who transport 2 lakh lunch boxes every day, and if we've heard about them, of course, except for the Mumbaites, one reason is because of the Harvard School of Business. The Harvard School of Business was fascinated with this system because it was extraordinarily economical. It was, again, with hardly any written documents whatsoever, and it was error-free. It was like Six Sigma error, which is one error in millions and millions of cases. And here we have a lot of values at work which are expressed in the Harvard Business School report, but also in these kind of moving testimonies where here the president of the Prafulla Education Center testifies that one day he saw Prafulla sad and depressed and asked him the reason. He said his father had passed away a few minutes back. I asked him why he was still working then. You won't believe the reply he gave me. He said, "Sir, my father passed away. By my customers are still alive, and I can't starve them." So this here and there is the kind of important values at work, silently, discreetly in the whole system. I will end with this case also investigated by the same Harvard Business School of the behavior of the staff of the Taj Mahal Hotel during the 26/11 attack, when most of the staff could have easily escaped through backdoor exits, which it, of course, knew very well, but instead chose to stay back and guide the guests of the hotel to safety as much as possible and protect them from the terrorists. And 13 staff members lost their lives in the process. So Harvard Business School was very puzzled. You know, how could they go to such an extent? And when once again, they investigated, produced a report, and their conclusion, they said not even the senior managers could explain the behavior of these employees who knew all the back exits. In the process, unfortunately, some of them gave their lives to save the guests. And their conclusion was that, number one, the Atithi Devo Bhava, the guest is God philosophy, was one of the main reasons. Now, if this is not Indian culture, what is? And secondly, there was a much more paternalistic equation between employer and employee, and Dr. Firodia alluded to this, that created a kinship. So that is also a cultural input. Taj employees felt a sense of loyalty to the hotel as well as a sense of responsibility to the guests. So this is where, you know, in some ways we can see Indian culture at work through what seems to be the world of business. And I will end with just, you know, that we do not get carried away, something which is always good to remember, and it was best expressed by Joan Robinson, a British economist. Whatever you can rightly say about India, the opposite is also true. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd now like to take the time out at this juncture to thank all our guests of honor for taking the time to be here and share this very special occasion with us by presenting them with a little memento to remember us by. I now request Mr. Harish Lakshman to please come up on the dais and present a memento to Mr. N. Shankar. Thank you, sir. I now call upon Mr. Vinay Lakshman to present a memento to Dr. Abhay Firodia. And finally, I call upon Mr. Aditya Ganesh to present a memento to Padma Shri Michelle Danino. Thank you all, and thank you all, gentlemen, for taking the time out to be here with us. And now, to wind up the evening with some concluding remarks, I vacate the podium for Mr. L. Ganesh.
Dr. Firodia,
Mr. Shankar, Dr. Danino, ladies and gentlemen, let me start the concluding remarks by thanking our speakers today who elevated this function to a level which we feel late Mr. LLN deserved. I am grateful on behalf of my family to each one of you. We debated quite some time about the need for this function. Our father was somewhat a low-profile person who may not have approved of such an event, as Lakshman mentioned in his opening remarks. However, we felt that in his centenary year, it would be good to recognize him and his contribution to the Rane group and to the family in the midst of many of his well-wishers. Some members of the family who live abroad could not join us today. We miss them. However, your response to our invitation is heartening, and we are grateful for that. Besides venturing into manufacturing auto components and building a strong foundation for Rane, he was equally involved in helping society through what we now term as corporate social responsibility. Mr. Shankar did mention all of them: support to the Gopalpuram Girls Higher Secondary School, establishment of the Margaret Sidney Hospital in Nanganallur, at that time the only hospital in that area, and being one of the founders of the Meenakshi College, and several other initiatives to help society. There were a number of other contributions he made and institutionalized this activity under the Ganapati Trust. He also reached out and helped many people in his personal capacity. On this special occasion, we are delighted to announce an award titled the Rane Pioneer of Change Award for work done in the field of social development. This award will recognize organizations and/or individuals who have excelled as leaders of social change in the field of skill development, health, and community development. This award will be biennial and will carry a medallion and a purse of rupees 10 lakhs. The guests who have honored us by their presence today were all, in our view, people whose lives Sri LLN touched in one way or the other. Your presence today calls for our sincere and deep appreciation. The organization of this event was possible due to the efforts of many employees at the Rane Corporate Center. Our special thanks to Ramesh, Mahalakshmi, Anusha, and K. Vishwanathan, and others who contributed to the meticulous planning. I once again thank you all for your response. Please do join us for cocktails and dinner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out here in your large numbers to celebrate this very special occasion with us. What more can we say other than let's drink to that? Let's raise a toast to the man that was Mr. LL Narayan. Thank you very much for being here. Goodbye, God bless, and bon appetit.